Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the golf club this evening for what is a very special night in the history of the club. A very special presentation coming up. To conduct a presentation and to take us through the proceedings, can I give you the club president, Mr. Gordon Lawson.
Thank you, Neil, and good evening, everyone. You're all very welcome, and it's great to see such a good turnout. And a particular welcome to, obviously, to Lorne, his wife Nell, and other members of their family. It's very good that you're able to be with us tonight. Now, in the absence of the captain, Willie Mackay, who has a family commitment but sends his apologies, it seems to have somehow fallen to me to make this presentation of life membership to Lorne, and I'm really very pleased that I've been given the opportunity of doing so. Now, you'll all be aware that Lorne has been a golf journalist for over 35 years or so, and has written quite a number of books, and for which he's received some prestigious awards. Now, I'm not going to go through the awards themselves, because I don't really want to embarrass Lorne anymore, and they are, after all, well documented. But suffice it to say that Lorne has been a great supporter of Royal Dornoch Golf Club, and his particular book, A Season in Dornoch, has been instrumental in promoting the club and the courses throughout the world. In fact, when the captain phoned me a few weeks ago to ask me if I was free this evening, I should probably have asked him why before I said yes. But anyway, I was. But from where I was sitting speaking to him, I could actually see Lorne's book, A Season in Dornoch, on one of my bookshelves. So I had a look through it after that call, because I hadn't read it for some time, as you possibly imagine. And there were actually two sections in the book which occurred to me straight away, almost from a personal point of view, in which I could empathise quite easily with Lorne's feelings and the way he described some of the events. There were probably more, but I think two will probably suffice. The first one was actually in the very first chapter, where he describes being on the 7th tee of the championship course in about 1977, and the views that he could see from all points of the compass, and his feelings and emotions in describing what he was seeing. But and it was particularly important or special for me, because I had a 7th tee moment in or around 1977 as well. I'm surprised actually we didn't meet on the 7th tee, but anyway, I don't think we did at that time. But anyway, it was in 1977, I think, that very good friends of ours from Edinburgh, where we lived at the time, moved to Dornoch, and we started coming to stay with them very regularly from that time on. And at that time, of the four of us, I was the only golfer, even using that term fairly loosely. But what I tended to do was to nip out first thing in the morning, play around, and back in time for breakfast. And you have to remember that in 1977, golf in Dornoch was really quite different from what it is today, because there was none of this booking tee times months, if not years in advance. And if you arrived here on the first tee at, say, 7 o'clock in the morning or about then, you would feel rather irked if you were inconvenienced by somebody else being there as well, even if it was Lorne. So, and so it was that one of these mornings I found myself on the 7th tee. It's not quite the same, it's not the same hole just exactly as it is just now, so the second tee was slightly to the left and slightly lower, but it still commanded a tremendous view of everything around about. And it was one of those mornings where the sun was up glinting on the water. There was no wind to speak of. There was nobody in front of me, nobody behind me. And unusually for me, and I say unusually because I'm those who know me in the audience tonight will know I'm fairly matter-of-fact and not prone to over-exaggeration or waxing lyrical, but it was one of those occasions in this life where I really thought consciously to myself, now I've got to savour this moment. And I did. I stood there for probably maybe 5 minutes or even longer, just taking it all in. And it was, if you read the first chapter of Lorne's book, it's very much like that in all the points of the compass that I could see, the views I could see, and the emotions that I felt. Although at that time, as far as I was concerned, I had no idea that in under 20 years' time from then, I would be living in Dornoch and becoming involved in the golf club here. And the other chapter in Lorne's book that caught my attention again was the Carnegie Shield. And I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, Lorne.
I'm a little concerned.
It's Lorne's first attempt at playing the Shield, which on his own admission didn't really go too well. But it's the lure of the Shield. And again, I could empathise or even sympathise, because the Shield really became, I suppose it became my major championship, and that I always tried to time our visits up to Dornoch so that I could play in it, even before we lived here. But it's a strange thing, this game, because no matter how well I was playing in the lead up to the Shield, and I know many of you probably don't believe this, but I was in those early days quite a half-decent golfer, a lot better than I am now, but it didn't matter how well I'd been playing, stepping onto the first tee out there in the Shield, the mind went blank, the brain was frazzled, and I'm not sure which is better of those two things, but combined they contributed to me seriously underachieving in the Shield for all those years. And therefore I can kind of sympathise with Lorne over his first effort to play, because it really assumes all sort of importance. And one of my analogies at the time when I was thinking about it was that it was sort of like a slightly different level maybe, but it was sort of like a club golfer playing in the Open, a club pro golfer playing in the Open Championship, because they'd be so pleased that they qualified, but desperate to do well. And in fact, I remembered that one of my old office colleagues when I worked in Edinburgh, who was quite a good golfer himself, but he had a good friend who was a club pro in somewhere in Fife, and the pro qualified for the Open Championship somewhere. I can't remember when, but it doesn't matter. And my friend went with him to caddy for him. And they managed to, and even in the 1980s, which is probably what we're talking about, the Open was really obviously quite a big event, a big deal. And as they were going down the first fairway, they compared notes as to what they had been thinking on the first tee. My friend, the caddy, said he'd been thinking, "Oh, please, I hope he hits it." And the pro had been thinking, he said, "What the bleep bleep am I doing here?" So at a different level, I think the Carnegie Shield was something like that for both of us. And before I leave the Shield, one thing that you also mentioned in the book, so I'm not breaching any confidences here, was something I don't think we've done for a while, Neil, is the eclectic scoreboard. Mm-hmm. Now, back then, or certainly in times when I've been helping out doing the scoreboards, the eclectic scoreboard was really quite fun in the sense that it recorded the best scores at each hole and the worst scores at each hole on any given day. And Lorne said he took no solace from the fact that his 8 at Foxy on one of the days appeared on the eclectic scoreboard, you see. But I have to tell you that it's all relative, Lorne, because I remember doing the scoring one day when somebody came in, having obviously from the scorecard, having had a torrid time out there, but was consoling himself with the fact that his 13 at the second would get him onto the eclectic scoreboard. But I can almost see the disappointment etched in his face when I had to inform him that there was already a 16. So it's all relative. But the game of golf brings out the emotions, or in fact the raw emotions. And these are just a couple of examples that I took from a season in Dornoch, and to which I can relate, and I'm sure that many of you will be able to do as well. And if you haven't read the book, then I would certainly commend it to you. And many of the people who are mentioned in it will probably be known to you. Now I could go on, but I think I'm sure you'll be glad to learn that I'm not going to go on very much more. And it just remains to me to say that that last year it was suggested to us by one of our members that Lorne be awarded life membership, and that he was thought to be worthy of it. Now, so that proposal was put to the Council of Management, and they readily approved it. In fact, last year I would think that was probably one of the easiest decisions that the Council of Management had to make. And I bet they're wishing they were all like that. But anyway, and in turn, it was also unanimously approved by the members at last year's AGM. So I think without further ado, I would like to present Lorne. He will step forward with a commemorative gift from the club to in respect of his life membership.
Thank you, Gordon. I mean, this is a perfect gift because there are many people who've read the book and think it's as much about Scotch as it is about golf or about the Carnegie Shield or about the land here. Now, I've just got a few remarks I want to make about, in reply to what Gordon said. You'll see that I made a few notes on the postcard from the Dornoch Bookshop, which occupies a prominent role in the book. I mean, my wife Nell and I ended up getting very lucky and living above the bookshop. We found a flat. It wasn't easy to find a flat for 3 months. I mean, it's the height of the season, but we managed to do it, and we moved into the bookshop. Nell arrived a few weeks after I did, and I called the book A Season in Dornoch for a particular reason. I was going to arrive on the beginning of summer, the longest day, which of course it was just a few days ago, June 21st, and I was going to leave on September 21st. I really wanted to call it A Season in Dornoch, not a summer in Dornoch, because I felt that any season here in this community would suffice for any other season. And I think that's true, because I know many people who spend time here outside of just the summer. They're here, some come in the winter, some come in the fall, some come in the spring. I know the summer is the preferred time, but that's also the busiest time. But it's so I called it A Season in Dornoch. It wasn't just happenstance, there was a reason for that. Now, the other day, Neil arranged for us to have a tour of the, we're talking about Scotch and this wonderful gift which we'll take home, to have a tour of Ball Blair, one of the smaller distilleries around. And whenever I go, we live in Toronto, and whenever I go into a liquor store there, the liquor LCBO in Ontario, if they have Ball Blair or Klein Leash or one of the local whiskeys, I pick it up for sure. So we really wanted to go to the smaller distillery. Neil arranged for us to go to Ball Blair, and the general manager there, John MacDonald, was good enough to give us all a tour, including my two wonderful grandsons who are here, Myra and Dennis. So we're getting them in the habit early. Not too early, I hope. But there we went, and John MacDonald gave us this tour, and as we were going along, there was a minute or two that I had to myself with John, and I said to him, you know, I asked him what kind of music he likes. And he said blues. He said he has a fantastic collection of blues. I like the blues as well. I like jazz. And we started talking about why some things appeal to you in a very deep way, why they resonate with you. And quite often there's no explanation for it. I asked him, why do you think the blues resonates with you? And he gave me a few responses, which were fine, but I also knew it was more than that. And in the same way, I was thinking about my attraction to Dornoch from when I first came here in 1977. What was it about this place that stuck so strongly with me? And I didn't return until 2000. I'd come back, those of you who've read the book know this, I'd come back here many, many times in the intervening 23 years to cover Open championships. I'd been to every Open at St. Andrews since 1984. Saw Tiger win twice in 2000 and 2005. Saw Faldo win in 95. I'd been to Opens at Royal St. George's and Troon, but I hadn't come back to Dornoch. It was this place I was coming mostly for work, not to come here. But in 2000, I wanted to spend, as I say, that season in Dornoch and to get away from the professional game and just to come back to this place that, although I hadn't been here in 23 years, stuck with me so deeply, stayed with me, and was so powerful in my mind and in my mind's eye. And when I thought about leaving for the summer of 2000 with Nell, of course, and getting away from the professional game for a while, I thought, well, there's where I'm going, to Dornoch. Even though I hadn't come back. I read a lot about it over the years, but I hadn't come back. So I made my way here, and when I was talking to John MacDonald about it, I was thinking about, well, what is there about Dornoch that appealed to me so much, that was so powerful in my mind and my mind's eye, that made me want to return here, and that I know a lot of people around the world feel about Dornoch. They want to be here for reasons maybe they can't even explain. You know, it's easy to stand here and look out the window and see these magnificent views and see the Firth and see the First Tee and the Struy down here where we played last week too, a very fine course in its own right. I could talk about the opportunities to play a different type of golf here, to bounce the ball on the ground, which as you get older becomes even more important, so you can get a little bit more distance. But it's that opportunity for creativity and hitting different shots, hitting a shot into the second hole, and landing it short, or maybe you choose to fly it on if you want to take that chance. Maybe get a 16, as you said. but right through the golf course, there's all that. Then I thought about the Dornoch itself and just walking around. I thought about the remoteness, as people call it, from the rest of Scotland, from Edinburgh, from Glasgow, and why that is so appealing. People would say, well, it's so remote, it's so quiet, it's charming. So there are all these reasons why it could appeal to you, but even those, I thought, as I was talking to John MacDonald, didn't really capture what it was. And then I realized, thinking about it further in the last few days and about this evening, is that for some of the things in life that are really powerful to you, that really stay with you, even though I'm a writer, you can't really explain it. You can't really find the words for it, whether it's music or scotch or golf or a woman. Maybe you don't really know. It's just there. It's just there. And that's the way it was with me in Dornoch, for sure. So Gordon mentioned that I first came here in 1977, and that's true. I came here, I was coming to Britain for 6 to 8 weeks. I was going to play in the British Amateur in Gatton. In those days, you didn't have to qualify for the Amateur. If you were a 3 handicap or better, you got automatically in. So under those criteria, I qualified and I came over, and I went to Edinburgh for a while first. Then I was going to come up here. I came up here meaning to stay just a day, really. But it so captivated me in 1977 that I stayed for 10 days. I met some people up here. I played here every day. I practiced down in the old airfield down there. So there was obviously something about it. I could have gone to any of the other Scottish courses, which are all wonderful as well, the links courses. Links golf is the kind that I like the most. But it was here that I stayed for those 10 days, went down to the British Amateur at Gantry, a wonderful course some of you will know in Scarborough in England, and tried, I should emphasize tried, to compete in the British Amateur. But the whole trip was fantastic, but it was highlighted by the 10 days that I spent here. And that was 1977, as I say. So from here, going to the British Amateur, but thinking about Dornoch, probably didn't help me play in the British Amateur because I was thinking about this place so much. Then 23 years passed, and I came back in 2000, spent the summer, wrote the book, and this year heard about the honorary life membership, which really means so much to me. I mean, Dornoch itself has meant so much to me since 1977. When I first came here and over here, I remember seeing the bound volumes of Golf Illustrated, which I thought, wow, if a golf club has bound volumes of Golf Illustrated going back a century or so, that's my kind of golf club. I knew all about the Donald Ross connection, of course. I played with Willie Skinner then, and I kept my notes on that round with Andrew's father and Willie the other day. He came to a bookstore event, excuse me, that we had here. And it was so nice to see Willie again. I think he's approaching 90. And of course, so many people from 1977 certainly that I met are gone, and quite a few from 2000 when I spent the summer and wrote the book. Some of the people in the book are no longer with us, but they remain strong influences on me and my love and feeling for Dornoch. And some of them really have become very, very close friends, and we communicate all the time and get together when we can. Those who are Americans, we get together. Those who are here, there's a worldwide community of people who care about this place. And I know that they're involved in the club, and it means so much to them. Excuse me, I just want to get some water here. So spending that summer in 2000 really, you know, it was 20, I can't believe it was 22 years ago. But I wrote the book, and it's found a readership really around the world. I'm not saying it's the best-selling golf book ever, but anybody who has read it, I feel like they've become almost a friend of mine, and through all the various means of communication now, email, Twitter, and so on and so forth, you know, there is this community of people that I'm aware of who really, really do love Dornoch and feel for it. Now, I was talking about a moment ago how you can't always express in words why something appeals to you so much, whether it's music or not. The other day I was doing some reading and I found that there was an exhibit that the Royal Scottish Academy put on. It was called The Artist and the Mountain. And the fellow whose art appeared in that exhibit said something which I think is fantastic and applies to Dornoch. Very simple. He said, "The door to the invisible must be made visible." And that, I think, expresses in words what this place is all about, or what music is all about, or what Scotch is all about in terms, or art, it doesn't matter. The theater in terms of how it appeals to those of us, particular area or particular culture. And I think of golf as more than a sport, it really is a culture. So the door to the invisible must be made visible. And I think that's what this place does. The golf course, the town, the Highlands, the entire area. Once you start driving up, I'm sure this is why you're living here now, Gordon. Once you start driving up from Edinburgh or Glasgow, or you're coming up from London, you're in an area that just somehow your blood pressure starts to drop. You've heard all this before. You calm down if you're under stress in the city from business or whatever. Or some people I know here, they've had, you know, some difficult moments in their lives, and they've come here to recapture their spirit and their sense of still being alive when difficult things have happened. And I've met all of these people, and I know Dornoch means so much to them because the door to the invisible is somehow made visible, even though they wouldn't express it like that, even though they can't find the words. I mean, I'm a writer and I can barely find the words, but I spent that whole summer and the writing of it after trying to find the words. And I'm very, very pleased, obviously, and honored that the club, in that book and in the people it's brought to this club, have seen fit to give me this life membership. It's really a great honor, and 23 years later, I mean, here I am, still loving this place as much as ever. Even more, it's seeped into my soul so much more. So I want to thank you, Neil, and you, Gordon, and Willie Mackay, the captain, and David Tepper, who I believe a fellow member who lives in San Francisco, for initiating this whole process by writing the letter. And it's somehow appropriate that we're staying in David's home, just down the road at the bottom of Golf Road. He's not here right now, so we're in his home, and here I am getting this life membership, and he's the guy who initiated it. But there are so many others I could thank, just about everybody I've met, and I won't do that, obviously. But the whole experience has been tremendous. I do want to thank my family for making the effort, coming here, Jaron and Martha, and their boys, there they are, Dennis and Meyer, and my wife Nell, coming here. It's not the easiest trip to make, obviously, from Toronto, and with the conditions these days of flying. But here they are, they made it. It's actually part of the motivation we're here, is because they said they wanted to come and to be here. So thank you to all of you for coming here. It makes it that much more special. Well, I could go on with all these things, but you know from my book and these many years later what this place means to me. And I will keep spreading the word through my articles and my conversations and through drinking scotch with people who I know share that feeling with me. So thank you very, very much. Now, the fellows also asked me to say a few words about my career, and I've only got apparently till 10 o'clock to do that. But I'm not gonna speak very long about it, but just a few kind of highlights. You know, because golf writing is not the most usual career, and I certainly didn't plan on a career as a golf writer. Although I remember in grade 11 in Ontario, in Toronto, I had a teacher, Nancy McKeon, an English teacher. You know, we've all been lucky enough probably to have some teachers who've influenced us, and Nancy McKeon was my English teacher in grade 11, and she asked the class, would you like to do? And I said, well, I'd like to be a writer. I don't really know what I want to write about, but I'd like to become a writer. I remember that. And then I had a history teacher in actually the year before in grade 10 at another school in Toronto, Margaret Rigsby. She was a fantastic history teacher. And when A Season in Dornoch came out, a friend of mine in Toronto has a club, has a restaurant, and then upstairs a jazz club. And this room upstairs it was kind of like a room you thought was Frank Sinatra might have frequented, because wasn't it all red and there was velvet, and it was quite a room. Anyway, he allowed me to use it for a book launch of A Season in Dornoch, and we have a friend in Toronto who somehow speaks a beautiful Scottish accent, even though she's Canadian. I don't think she's ever been to Scotland. But she read from the book, and I hadn't really been in touch with Nancy McKeon or Margaret Rigsby. Well, Margaret Rigsby a little bit, the history teacher, but I got a hold of both of them, and I invited them to the book launch because they had such an influence on me as teachers. And they came, and they were very, very happy to come to this book launch of A Season in Dornoch. So, you know, going back to how I became a writer, it was not intentional in any way. I just fell into it. I was actually, I had applied to law school and to medical school in Canada and gotten into both of them, but honestly, I really didn't think that was the way I wanted to go. I'd probably still be in therapy if I went into any of those. But instead, I chose golf therapy. But, you know, I was a good enough golfer to play in amateur tournaments and junior tournaments, and there was one tournament, the club championship at the club I played at in Toronto, and I'd shot 71, 77, 70 the first 3 rounds, and I was leading by a shot going in the last round. Then on the first hole, I hit my drive down there, and I only had a 9 or an 8 iron in hand up to this elevated green at this course. And I remember standing over the ball, and clearly it became evident to me that I wasn't cut out to be a competitive golfer, even though I tried to fool myself for a number of years after. Because I stood over the ball and I thought to myself, well, what would Trevino do here, the golfers of the day? Oh, what would Nicholas do here? And I went right through and then there was Hogan with his big muscle swing. So, of course, I double bogeyed the first hole, and then I shot 78 the last round and finished 4th or something. But what I did, the way I sort of drowned my sorrows, is I came home and I wrote about that experience in this last round and what had happened and what was going through my mind and how that really wasn't conducive to playing good golf, championship golf. So I wrote this long piece, and I decided to send it off to Golf Digest to an editor there. And he liked the piece. He thought it was a little long, maybe a little bit too, I don't know what, a little bit too personal perhaps, probably a little bit too overwrought emotionally, because I was quite disturbed by the fact that I couldn't control my own thoughts out there, which most golfers will know. Ray Floyd once told me, by the way, that he said, if I told you what goes through my mind when I'm playing around, even in the US Open or the Masters, if I told you what goes through my mind to keep myself calm, to hit the right shots, you'd probably have me committed. So I think that's just a fact. Some golfers can handle it better than others. Anyway, I wrote this long piece, sent it off to the editor at Golf Digest. He liked it, wrote me back, told me they'd like to publish it with some editing, and I thought, wow, this is great. It never did get published in Golf Digest because the fellow who lived in Montreal at the time, although he worked for Golf Digest down in New York, he apparently flew the coop, left his wife, left his family, and I never heard from him again. So that article never got published, but it did tell me that, you know what, maybe I can write a little bit, maybe there's a way to write about this game. Because golf is a sport that, and I'd already spent, as I said, I was doing a doctorate, or maybe I didn't say it, I was doing a doctorate in psychology at a university in Toronto. I'd already achieved my MA, where of course my minor paper was in the psychology of golf. There was a fantastic literature, and still is, on the mental side of the game, going back to really the late 1800s. Charles Sherrington, who won a Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine, he wrote a fantastic piece in a magazine called the North American Review, which he just termed the psychology of golf. And he said, he wrote that he thought that the golf course, these are his words, won't be exactly his words, but they're close enough, could be used as a laboratory for the most important questions in human psychology. In other words, why do our minds run rampant? Why do we get nervous? Why do we get anxious over a 3-foot putt? These sorts of things. So he thought that this laboratory of the golf course could perhaps be used to explore some of these questions. I'm sure I thought at the time, well, that's my kind of sport then. It's my kind of investigation, of inquiry. So knowing that there was such a literature in the history of the game, I spent way too much time in the library reading about golf and the psychology of the game and the golf swing. I quickly became a golf swing nerd, you might say. It didn't help my game, but I realized that there was this tremendous literature of the game, and I started following writers, or reading them anyway, like the British writers, Henry Longhurst, Pat Ward-Thomas, Peter de Bruyner. One time when the Ryder Cup was in Rochester across Lake Ontario, Peter de Bruyner and Pat Ward-Thomas were coming up to Glen Abbey for the Canadian Open, and I asked if I might have lunch with them and if they would mind reading one or the two of the pieces I tried to write. And they said, yeah, sure, why not? And they were very, very helpful to me as well. You know, you need a little help when you're going along as a writer, and I've tried to do that with younger writers all the time now. I'll always sit down and have a coffee, or preferably a scotch with them, and talk a little golf. So that really, I still wasn't writing professionally about golf. I was trying to finish this PhD, which I never did, because I did start to have some success. I caddied on the tour, starting in the 1970 Canadian Open at London Hunt Club in London, Ontario. And I continued to caddy for a guy named Bob Dixon. Some of you might remember the name Dixon, spelled D-I-C-K-S-O-N. He was one of only 3 golfers to win the British Amateur and the US Amateurs in the same year, I think. And I got to know him pretty well. We're still friends, actually. He ended up working for the PGA Tour in Pontevedra. But he won those 2 big amateur tournaments. And I would write occasionally about him just for myself, about the rounds we played. I remember once in Cincinnati, he was going to play in the tournament then called the Kings Island Open. And I looked at the pairing sheet for the first round, and I saw that he was going to be playing with Nicklaus. So I thought, whoa, this is exciting. He's going to be playing with Jack Nicklaus. So I drove to Cincinnati, and of course it's Nicklaus's home territory, Ohio. It wasn't Columbus, but it was still Ohio. And on the first hole, Nicklaus, you know, he's got his persimmon driver, his wooden driver, of course, hits it down there, what looked to all of us like a great drive, and it sort of drew, you know, right to left, maybe 10 yards, and he got a standing ovation from everybody, and he looked at us, the other players, and the caddies, he said, isn't that something? I got a standing ovation for that shot. He says, I hit it 20 yards offline. I meant to cut it, fade it 20 yards, and I drew it 10 yards. So it was really 30 yards offline, but it looked good anyway. So I thought, everybody, even the best players, they don't hit the shot every time where they want to go, obviously. But in 1980, the Canadian Open was going to be held at Royal Montreal, and I was going to caddy for a young Canadian. He was a star already, that he'd won the 75 and 76 Canadian Amateurs, Jim Nelford. And in 1977, that's where I met him formally at that British Amateur, Ganton. And I started caddying for him when he turned pro the next year, and he played in that Canadian Open at Royal Montreal. I was going to caddy for him, and I suggested a column on caddying from a caddy's point of view to our national newspaper, to the Globe and Mail, to the sports editor there, Cease Jennings. And he said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Well, as it turned out, Nelford, the first 2 rounds, shot 68-70, and he was playing in the last group on Saturday with Nicklaus and Trevino, so it was a good time to start a column. He didn't play well on the weekend, but still, when I was a little bit emboldened when I came back And I told Mr. Jennings, the sports editor, you know, he said, next time you go out on tour, maybe there's some articles you can contribute to our paper. And it still is Canada's national newspaper, so it was a good place to start my writing career, freelance writing career. And I continued to write for them after Cease agreed to my writing a column, not only about the professional game, because I think there's so much more to golf than the professional game. And I've often said if Cease Jennings were sitting in that sports editor's office that day in his desk, you know, you've got to be really lucky, I think, to end up in a career that you really want. That, you know, that you're not toiling away at something that you're doing it just for the money, or you're doing it because you have to, you know, you have to make a living. I was so fortunate he was there. And the real odd thing is that his son, Mike, is now the superintendent at the club I play at in Toronto, Maple Downs. Of course, you know, it was amazing when I found that out. So I started writing the column for the Globe and Mail, and I wrote it for 33 years in Canada. Although I was never on staff at the Globe, I considered myself on staff. At the same time in 1980, we started on a national golf magazine in Canada, and I was the first editor. So that year was kind of pivotal. 1980, we started a Canadian golf magazine, a national publication. I wrote for our national newspaper, and it's obviously easier to get published than other publications if you're writing for national publications. So that led to my writing for magazines really all over the world. I had a regular column in Golf Monthly in the UK here, Links magazine, Senior Golfer, which is now defunct. I got to write as a freelancer for all kinds of other magazines, and over the years, you know, kind of it was all just one thing leading to another, not necessarily anything planned, and that led to my writing. I think it's 15 or 16 books by now, including with some top players, our great Canadian golfer George Knudson. I've done books with Nick Price when he was the #1 player in the world. I did a book with David Ledbetter on Hogan's fundamentals. He was kind of re-evaluating Hogan's fundamentals. None of these instruction books, by the way, helped my game at all. It just confused me tremendously. One time I was playing at a club in Toronto, and I saw that Chuck Cook was there. He was Payne Stewart's teacher at the time. So he invited me to play with him. And so we went and had a round, and I didn't ask him for any advice or anything, but I remember on the 14th tee, Chuck Cook said to me, you know, Lorne, with the shape of your golf swing, I wouldn't try to do anything but cut the ball. Okay, that's fine. Then when I did the book with Ledbetter, and he invited me to a 3-day clinic he was doing in Florida, he said, you know, Lorne, with the shape of your swing, I wouldn't try to do anything but draw the ball. So I had two completely opposite. How am I supposed to play any kind of decent golf when I got this going on? But, you know, I was very fortunate to be able to write all of these books, including obviously A Season in Dornoch, and to work with top players. I did a book on, when I was a kid, a lot of you will know the name Mo Norman, an eccentric, a brilliant Canadian golfer who, except for his, you might say, psychological liabilities and limitations, would have been one of the best golfers in the world. He's still considered one of the best ball strikers in the world. And luckily, from the first time I met Mo when I was 13, 14 years old, and later on as a writer, I kept notebooks, and I finally wanted to write a book about my friendship and experiences with him over the years. And I kept talking about it, never really did it. But Nell said to me, are you going to write a book about this guy eventually or what? And I still delayed for a couple of years because I thought, I don't know if I want to do that. Finally, she said, you know, you really should write this book. So I did, and it's actually done quite well because Mo has a worldwide reputation. He died in 2004, but if anything, he's even more popular right now. I did a book on, in 2003, Mike Weir, the Canadian, had won 2 tournaments early in the year, was ranked #3 in the world, and a publisher in Canada, the same publisher as did A Season in Dornoch, approached me, said, you know, we'd like to do a book on Mike Weir. He's so popular here in Canada. He's #3 in the world right now. And then, you know, what do you think? Is there a book to be done? I said, well, Mike, who was 33 years old only at the time, I said, he's too young to have a biography written about him. I don't think he'd want to do an instruction book, and I certainly don't want to do an instruction book. Because #1, he's left-handed. #2, I've messed up my swing enough by doing all these instruction books. But let me think about it. Then I thought, you know, I'll write a book called A Season in the Majors, Mike Weir in Pursuit of Golf's Ultimate Prize, because I knew that he was a tough-minded guy, I knew that he felt he could win a major. So before I even had a contract for the book, he went out and he won that 2003 Masters. And I remember the next day, after Augusta, I was invited to play up at Pinehurst. I drove up to Pinehurst 4 or 5 hours from Augusta. I was playing with a couple of people when my publisher called me, the one from Toronto, and said, he's won the Masters, we got to get a book done before Christmas, really, because that's the time when you really sell books. And I told the guys I was playing with, I said, look, I just got to sit in this cart for 5 minutes and talk to Doug Gibson, the publisher. So I talked to him, and I was so tired from the excitement of the night before, after Mike won the Masters. Mike and a few Canadian writers got together, and probably had a little bit too much to drink. But then I drove up to Augusta, and I was so tired I fell asleep in the golf cart, sitting there. But we decided to do the book, and we would call it Mike Weir, The Road to the Masters. And Mike couldn't have been, he called me up and he asked me what he could do to help out the book. He ended up writing the foreword. I went down 3 weeks later and saw him in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was staying in a real fancy hotel suite. That's what happens, I guess, when you win the Masters. And ended up doing that book, and as I say, it did quite well. And you move on a few years, and and I got to know Tiger a fair bit. I knew that Tiger loved to talk about the golf swing. That was the way you captured Tiger's attention. You know, obviously he had his personal issues and so on and so forth. After his, crashing his car, not the one a couple of years ago when he had the difficulties with his first wife, Elin, and there was a, car crash as well. When he left the property, left their house and hit, I think, a sign or a pole near the house. Every radio station in Canada, I think, called me to be interviewed about Tiger, and I said, look, I don't know anything more than you do, really. But anyway, I talked. And then a number of years later, in 2017, it was 20 years after Tiger had won that Masters when he was just a kid, 21 years old, by 12 shots. And I'd gotten to know him a fair bit by then. And so I proposed a book about a memoir of Tiger's first win in the Masters, that when he won 12 shots, he shot 40 the front nine. Everybody, a lot of writers had written him off, but he came back in 30, and of course he went on and won by 12 shots. So I approached Tiger and his people, and to see if they were interested in maybe publishers love anniversary editions and the anniversary books. It was going to be 20 years after Tiger won that Masters, and they agreed. They wanted to do it. So we did a book called The 1997 Masters, My Story. And it was Tiger describing in his own words that we sat around, we watched a video of the 97 Masters. CBS Sports sent us all of their telecasts. And it was fascinating talking to Tiger because as a golfer, I got to talk to him about a lot of different shots he hit there. And some of the thoughts that people might think were the best shots of that 97 Masters, he didn't think that way at all. He thought there was a shot on the 6th hole when the pin was back left and he missed it to the back right. And there was a little apron of, you wouldn't call it rough at Augusta, but it was kind of grass that you wouldn't want to putt through at the time. It was Bermuda grass. So he chipped it. And he had to chip it, I swear he had to land the ball on a dime to kill the speed and run it down the hole, which he did. It finished about there. And he said, that's probably one of my best shots of that 97 Masters. And remember, we were talking about it, the book, it was late 2015 for publication in 2017. And you would have thought he would have said that chip shot on 16 when he beat Chris DeMarco, when he holed it from behind the green, was maybe the best shot he'd ever hit at the Masters. But he would talk about these little nuanced shots and go through them, and we tried to make that the kernel of the book, you might say, thinking about or looking at how Tiger was thinking about all of the shots that he had hit and why he'd hit them and why he'd chosen this shot. I remember at one of the Open Championships at St. Andrews in 2005, I think that was he won by 8 shots and 5 shots. Anyway, I was out following him, and on, I think it was the 7th hole, it was actually a hot day, and he had a dusty lie, and only about 110 yards, and he obviously a lob wedge or something for him up in the air. Instead, he chose what looked to me out there as a 6 or a 7 iron, and he pretty much chipped it all the way to take. That's why, Will, I've encouraged you to chip with a 5 iron this week. Anyway, he hit this magnificent little shot that he just pinched off the ground. So later on in his press conference, I thought, I want to ask him about that shot, because it was such a tricky little shot and such an unusual shot. But I thought to myself, you know, if he doesn't answer this properly, I'm going to look like a fool in front of 1,000 journalists from around the world. But I thought, knowing Tiger, that he would actually consider that a good question. And it would, he always liked answering questions from journalists who he could tell knew the game. So you could go back and find that transcript right now at ASAP Sports, which has transcripts from the last 30 years of golf tournaments. And you'll see the answer he gave. It was an exhaustive answer, kind of like asking a jazz musician or somebody who makes scotch, you know, why did you do it this way? Why did you hit that shot? Why did you pick that note in that concert, for example? And he gave a very interesting answer on why he hit that shot, as opposed to, and it wasn't a big wind. It's not like there was a big wind and he couldn't hit a lob wedge up there, but he just wanted to hit that shot. It felt right to him. So that's what we tried to do in the book, in that 97, about the 97 Masters. And people ask me what it was like to work with Tiger, and for me, as I say, you know, a golf architecture, golf nerd myself, it was fascinating. I had an opportunity to talk, forget about all his personal problems, although he talked about that a lot in the book. I told him that we're going to need to deal with that. I told his team, Mark Steinberg, his manager, we're going to have to deal with that. We can't, because this was 2015. He'd already gone through, he hadn't had his most recent accident, but he'd gone through a lot already personally, and he would need to talk about that in a book meant for the general public. And he did. If you read it, you'll see there's quite a bit about his personal problems. There's quite a few digressions, just as there was in the Mike Weir book, just as there is in the Dornoch book, into other areas of life, other areas of golf for Tiger. It was a fantastic experience working with him. As a matter of fact, near the end, when the book was getting close to at least going to print, he called me up and he said, you know, I think we should switch the last two chapters. In other words, the last chapter should be the second last and vice versa. And we thought about it, and he was right, and it worked better that way. So he gave the book a lot of attention, and you know, it was really a great experience working with him. So that was a few years ago, and I've continued. I stopped writing for the Globe and Mail in 2013 after 33 years. I still write for Score magazine. I write for those few publications in golf that are left around the world. Publishing has gone through a lot of changes, obviously, but it's really been a fantastic career. I mean, I couldn't have imagined when I played in that club championship in whenever it was, 1972, and sent that article to Golf Digest, that would have led to my having this kind of a career as a golf writer. I came up at a time when golf writing was really in the ascendancy, you might say. You could make a decent living writing about golf. They could send you to places, as they sent Nell and I to England. Remember, for that that article on golf in Hardy country, Thomas Hardy country. So, you know, you could, I don't know that you can get those kind of assignments now, but I came up at a time when there was lots of opportunities to write about all aspects of the game. I'll really be forever grateful to Cease Jennings at the Globe and Mail, and to the people who started Score magazine in Canada, and to all of the other editors around the world who encouraged my writing and allowed me to keep doing this really until fairly late in life. And writing isn't something you have to stop. I still think about whether I should take the club back more with my hands than my body. That'll never go away. But it's just a fantastic sport to write about, and it took me to Dornoch. It's taken me here to tonight. It allowed me to write this book and to somehow be granted this honorary life membership. So, I feel very, very fortunate. And again, thank you, and thanks to everybody for coming here. It's been a great, great evening, and a wonderful, I don't know what, almost 50 years I've been writing about this crazy game. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorne. I think that's a great insight into your life and your career, and how golf writing has given you such a varied and enjoyable life and taking you all over the world. So it's been great to listen to you. Thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions for Lorne before we let him go and enjoy a whiskey?
Yep. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously it's a psychology of everything, right? It's all gone into golf. Have you ever thought of writing a book about anything else? Because obviously you're thinking, you're sensitive, you're sentimental about certain things. Is that
Yeah,
what it
I mean,
goes
I've
to
done
be?
magazine articles on some other subjects here and there.
You have.
Yeah, but not too much though. You know, it's a good question because I'm sure my interest would feed into other areas.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, but you know, I've been fortunate enough to continue to be published in golf, and that's kept me busy enough.
So
Who
you
knows?
haven't time to do anything else.
Well, you know, writing did occupy a
Yeah.
lot of my time, and you have to do a good amount of research for. But there are a few things I've thought about, but I don't know. I'm getting up there now, and I doubt it. I just want to enjoy my family and traveling. So it's unlikely that I'll do anything like that. But certainly, you know, the kinds of problems that are psychological problems that manifest themselves in golf are applicable to all kinds of areas of life. You know, meeting that fellow Mo Norman and you know, seeing his psychological limitations, you might say, they're what kept him from achieving at the highest levels of the game. Or seeing somebody, you know, like Tiger or Mike Weir, those people that do succeed. What is it that allows them to succeed, and how can you apply that to other areas of life? But it's probably not going to happen. That'll write another book on another subject. Anybody else? Somebody had their hand up. Yes.
What's your take on the live golf?
I wish it would go away. You know, really. I mean, I have no interest in it, honestly. I've said this to Nell and to other people that, you know, I'm glad I'm not writing about golf right now, about the professional tour, because I wouldn't want to have to deal with that. You know, I don't know what people's, you know, political inclinations are in this room or whatever, but I think it's a far different thing for golfers who have a lot of money already, the kind of people that that they've gotten already to join that tour. You know, for somebody like Bryson DeChambeau to say, I'm going to join them for my family. He doesn't even have a family. He's not even married. Or Phil Mickelson, who's made so much money from the PGA Tour. You know, I know Phil, and he's really, I think, he hasn't done something positive for himself, his family, or for the game, or some of these other people who are going over there. It's just, to me, it's not golf. A 54-hole tournament, a shotgun start. Now, I don't know if any of you saw the Canadian Open over here from 2 weeks ago when Rory McIlroy won. And it was thrilling coming down the stretch. Well, one of the reasons it was thrilling is not only because Rory's, you know, one of the 2 or 3 best golfers out there right now, but because he was going to finish on the 18th hole. Imagine if he was going to finish on the 5th hole. There's somebody out there who's finishing on the 17th. One's a par 5, one's a par 4. There's no drama. I don't get it. And plus, golf has always been a sport where it's a meritocracy. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I mean, you could say it's an entertainment. Anybody who makes the cut should be paid, and there's probably some truth to that. But one of the great things about golf, of course, has been that you know, there's guaranteed money in other ways, appearance money, but there's not guaranteed money in the sense of all you have to do is tee it up in a PGA Tour event or, you know, the Master, and you're going to get some money. So I'm not fond of that. The whole Saudi question, that's a whole other thing, but just from the purely, although I have strong opinions about that too, but I feel like, you know, as from just the golf point of view, I wish it would go away. But it won't, obviously, because they have a bottomless amount of money. And, you know, what I think is a bit absurd is when people criticize somebody like Brandel Chambly at Golf Channel, and they say to him, well, if you were offered $200 million like Mickelson, you would go, you would drop all your principles. I know Chambly, he wouldn't do that. You know, not everybody has a price. I don't think so anyway. You know, there are amounts of money for organizations that you don't agree with that you just wouldn't go to them. So I think the PGA Tour is not blameless. They've done a lot of things over the years. Suddenly they found this big pot of money to give the players, right? In this other series that they're going to change and develop at the end of the year. But honestly, I'm glad I'm not writing about that. I really am. Yes?
Who do you think was the better ball striker, Tiger or Mo?
Well, Tiger, and it's right on the front cover of our book, said that Mo and Ben Hogan are the 2 best ball strikers he's ever seen. Tiger said that to Jaime Diaz of Golf Digest years ago, and we used that right on the cover of the book. That was, you know, nothing he said to me, but it was public information. So, you know, Tiger met Mo at a Canadian Open one year and had a great deal of respect for him. And, you know, it's possible that Mo was a better, you know, it's tough to get into that discussion, who can say different eras, but Mo always knew where the ball was going, which is kind of the highest art of the game, I think. Anybody else? Yes?
Was Mount Norman long enough?
That's a good question. He may not have been long enough. The way he swung the ball with his, really short golf. I think today, if you were playing, he wasn't really that long even when he was playing. But today, where you have to bomb the ball 320 yards in the air sometimes, I don't think he would be long enough. But still, accuracy matters. But it probably wouldn't matter as much today when, as you know, they just, hit it as far as you can, and if it's in the rough, hit a lob wedge in as opposed to a 7-iron from the fairway. I have a friend who plays the PGA Tour, and he's now just on the Corn Ferry Tour. He's 42 years old, and he's a good player. He hasn't won. He lost 2 playoffs. First, he lost to Jordan Spieth in his first win. But for him, he drives at 280, 290, which is not short, but it's short by today's standards, and it's tough for him to draw. And he's accurate, and he hits it down the fairway 280. And he's hitting, and par 4s are getting to be 500 yards, so he's hitting maybe a 5-iron in there, and somebody else is hitting a 9-iron, and it's tough to play. You can beat somebody one day, but it's hard to beat somebody over 4 days when there's that disparity.
How long was Mount Norman, do you think?
Using Bellata balls in Persimmon Woods, he would hit a 230, 240 at the most. But he could do anything. I grew up at a club in Toronto. That's where I first got to know Mo. Fairly short golf course. There was a Stanley Thompson design course, really a wonderful course. And there was a hydro line stretching out across the fairway, about 50 yards down there. And there was a tournament that started the Ontario amateur golf season every year called the Eager Beaver. And I played in it. And on that first hole, it was basically a 2-iron short of a river, and then a something 8-9-iron up there to that elevated green where I started thinking about Trevino and Nicholas and all those people. But Mo would come out there, and I know this will sound ridiculous, but I saw it happen. He would come out and put on a clinic on the first tee, and he would hit that hydro wire intentionally, a thin hydro wire. He would hit it 1 or 2 times out of 10. There was a local rule that if you did hit the hydro wire, you got to re-tee it, but he could hit that. And I'll tell you one more Mo Norman story. I could tell you a million Mo Norman stories, but I was in Florida one time watching him hit balls at this kind of scrubby range, and about 220 yards out there, 210 yards, 2 women were walking across the range for some reason. I don't know why, maybe there were houses on there. Anyway, they were walking across. So we said, another person who was there said, Mo, stop, you might hit those women as they're walking across. He took one look. He made some sort of instantaneous mental calculation of how fast they were walking, how much space there was between them, where they were walking, and how he would hit. He had a forward in his hand at the time, hit it. And he said, oh, I won't hit them, I won't hit them. He repeated himself. He double spoke all the time. Oh, no, I won't hit them, I won't hit them. And he hit this forward, and I went right between them. He was accurate. And that's a true story, as is the hydro wire. I always tell people there are thousands of stories about Mo, and some of them are even true. But those 2 are true. Yes? Claire?
I'm interested in, obviously, you said 50 years you've been writing about golf. What do you think about technology now in terms of your younger generation coming through Twitter, social media? How is that impacting on writing? Are we going to get the true writers still coming forward with pen and paper type production?
Well, I think you have to look beyond the websites. There is a lot of good writing going on out there still, from younger people. But you have to look to, there's something called a Fire Pit Collective, where some writers have come over. Alan, is Larry here? Larry Hirsch's son is now going to golf.com, where guys like Alan Shipnuck, who just wrote the Mickelson biography, and Michael Bamberger, they're now working for this Fire Pit Collective. And they have the room to, one thing about the internet is you have the room to stretch out. You're not limited, right, by print. So, for those publications, digital publications that are encouraging that, there is good writing. There's a lot of good architecture websites. So if people want to seek it out, they can find good writing. But you're not going to get too much at all in the traditional magazines. First of all, the only ones that are left. I guess there are a couple here in the UK. But they're so beholden to equipment advertisers, for one thing. That's a problem. And they don't have the funds, most of them, to send writers far afield. I think Golf Digest, was it, that just sent a writer down to, where was it, Cuba? Or not Cuba. Anyway, it might have been, there's a golfer named Morgan Hoffman, who's a PGA Tour player, and a great young player, but he's had a serious kind of medical condition for a number of years. It took him like it's a muscular dystrophy problem. And he and his wife or girlfriend moved down there, and they're wrapped up in alternative medicine, totally. That's how he wants to cure himself. And he's come a long, long way to where he can go back and he's playing on the PG Tour again in a limited way. So Golf Digest did send a writer down there to spend time with Morgan Hoffman, and it proved to be an excellent piece. But you don't see that much anymore. Occasionally the New Yorker, you have to look to non-golf magazines to do those longer pieces. But it doesn't happen too often, but if you dig deep, you can find good pieces on the internet. Not that easy, so, but they're there. Yes, was there somebody else?
At the back row.
One of the elderly people in the audience, I think, tonight. Two of my first favorite writers were one British and one American. The British was Henry Longhurst, who he was sometimes affectionately known as Henry Longthirst. And the other was Herb Wynne, who wrote a wonderful passage in one of his books called North the Links of Dornoch. Have you any views on those two writers?
Yeah, well, Longhurst was a little bit before my time, but I read him all the time. He's the guy who said about the yips, you know, once you've had him, you've got him. Right? And he was a good player. He also wrote another fine piece called Golf Gives Me Up. He was only in his late 50s, and he was no longer the player he once was. And he had a revelation. He said, you know, I don't have to keep doing this. So he wrote a beautiful piece. You can use the word beautiful for that. And he stopped playing. Herbert Warren Wind, I actually got to know really well. And I have a file at home of his letters to me. And I wrote quite a bit about him. When he was later in life and living in an assisted living facility in Bedford, Massachusetts, Golf World, which no longer exists anymore in print form, it's only digital. And when it's only digital, they don't get the advertising. And when they don't get the advertising, they can't send writers afield like they did. But they sent me up to spend a few days with him in Bedford, Massachusetts. I met him at his assisted living facility. We went out for lunch with a guy named Robert McDonald, a close friend who published a whole series of books called The Classics of Golf that Herb Wynne wrote the forewords to. I also had a tradition at the Masters of walking 18 holes with Herb Wynne all of the time. One day he came out of the press room, Herb Wynne, and he just used these very small notebooks. And I was just out walking, and I looked, and I saw a notebook on the ground. I picked it up, and it was his. So of course I gave it back to him. He couldn't have been more thankful. Yeah, I mean, he wrote really, really small print. And I've also gotten to know his nephew, Bill Sheft, who's a novelist and writes. He used to write a lot for the Letterman show, comedy, and he wrote a novel in which Herb Wynne is kind of a disguised character in it. His eccentric Uncle Herb Wynne. But yeah, he was a big influence on me. I read all, I used to get, in those early days, my parents subscribed to the New Yorker, and so did I. And that's where he wrote his sporting scenes column, as you'll know. So, I'm sure he had just about more influence on me than any other writer, because in those days you could write long, and he certainly did. He often said, I don't know how you people write a column of 800 words. It takes me that long to clear my throat. But Herb was great. He had a fantastic, he played in the U.S. amateur. He was a good player up there in Massachusetts. Still worth reading all of his stuff. If you have an attention span that's more than a minute. All right, well, thank you. Oops, sorry. Oh, Matthew, that's you. I didn't know that. You're back now.
Yes, I've brought 2 words to British Airways to send me via Aberdeen instead of Inverness. We were talking earlier about Tiger's 5-iron and some other shots that you've witnessed. Is there an outstanding shot of your own on the championship course that sticks in your memory?
I'm glad you mentioned the possibility of a good one as opposed to But you know, it's funny because twice this week on the second hole, I've hit one of those shots that came off exactly as I want. First of all, I only carry 7 clubs when I play. That's true at home as well. I'll walk with 7 clubs because I prefer to walk if I can. As I've gotten older, and if it's too hot, I'll take a cart. But most of the time, I will walk with 7 clubs if possible. So I only brought 7 clubs over. 3, 5, 7, 9. I think there's a sandwich in there, a driver and putter. So on that second hole, pin was one day in the middle, towards the front, the other day it was to the back, and each day I pictured this shot with a 5-iron, as it happens, that would land short of the green and run up. And both times so far I hit just the shot I saw. The first day it landed, it finished 10 feet short of the hole and I missed the putt. Next day it finished 6 feet just left of the hole and I made the putt. So those two, I remember. I haven't remembered any of the other bad shots. But yeah, that's the kind of opportunity you have at Dornoch to hit these shots. Long running shots, ball bouncing. You know, I don't fly the ball in here very much. Do you, Neil? Neil's a good player.
Not often one, no.
Yeah, I know. So you have these opportunities. You don't get that in America where you're hitting over water. Years ago I played a course in England with a fellow. The club was called the Isle of Purbeck. You know, just some course down there. And they set me up with a fellow, Howard Singleton, who was called the President in Perpetuity. He was approaching 100 at the time. And when Nell and I pulled up into the parking lot, I saw this gentleman taking his clubs out of his, what do you call it, his boot, his trunk. And I thought, I bet you that's him. It just looked like, and it was. And on one hole, a short par 4 from where we were playing, it was maybe 280 yards. You know, he hit his driver down there, maybe 110 yards. Then he hit another shot down there about 90 yards, 200, so he had about 80 yards, and then he pitched it in from there. And I thought, if there were water in front of this green, he couldn't play this hole, you know? But here you have the chance. You can still keep playing. So, you know, I would guess if anybody did a study, they would find that the percentage of people in Britain who continue playing the game past 80 or 85 is higher than the percentage of people who play the game in North America, because they just don't have, unless they just pick it up and just bang the ball around.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lorne. Just earlier today, I received an email from one of our other Royal Dornoch members, who is himself a very well-known writer, Brad Klein, who is a biographer of Donald Ross. Brad wished to be here himself to witness this, but unfortunately can't. But he did pen a little piece for me to say, which I think really sums up the reason why we're here this evening. And Brad has said, 125 years ago, there was a Scottish golf diaspora to the New World. Among those coming to spread the gospel of golf was Donald Ross of Dornoch. In time, there came to develop a diaspora of sorts in reverse, as North Americans discovered Royal Dornoch Golf Club. Congratulations to the club in honouring Lorne Rubenstein, one of the most powerful voices of that reverse diaspora, who has helped North Americans enjoy the unique pleasure of golf in Dornoch.
Well, it's nice of Brad to say that. I will thank him. Brad and I first met actually when we caddied in that 1980 Royal Montreal Open. He was caddying for, I forget who it was. He ended up caddying for Bernard Langer quite a bit. So he's a very well respected voice, and it's very, very kind of him to say that.
Okay.
All right, thank you again.
Thank you, Lorne. Time for whiskey.
Yeah.